Well, welcome to Noel's World of Whiskey, and tonight we're going to go after Glencadam. So this is a whiskey I mentioned when I did the last review there on Arran, the Arran 10 and the Arran 15, Arran 18, pardon me, the Arran 18, and I was mentioning about the Roy and Ralphie's Online Whisky Awards, the World Championship Whisky Awards, and the Glencadam actually did quite well on that. We know that Arran won the World Championship, the Online World Championship Whisky Award for the Best Entry Level, Best Value Award, and this one actually did quite well. It got a lot of votes, and it was, I'm not sure if it was second or third, but it was up there. It certainly did quite well. You know, with some of the other players, Kilkerran and Lacheg and Munahaban. So I'm just going to say that this has been a sleeper, a real sleeper, because this is a really old distillery, 1825. The Excise Act was in 1823. This distillery is documented 1825, and I believe it was Cooper that started the distillery, but he sold it 2 years later. There's quite a history, and actually I'm going to need my phone here just to read off, because it did go through a lot of history through the years. So if we go right back to the beginning, 1825, George Cooper, he was a merchant. He only had it for 2 years, and he sold it to David Scott. 1827 to 1852, David Scott had it, but he kind of only had it running for a short while there, and then basically mothballed it. And then it had some production there with Alexander Milne Thompson. That was from 1852 to 1857. And then then the company, the Glencadam Distillery Company, was formed, and that was from 1857 to 1860. And then we have Wallace and Scott from 1860 to 1867. Now, I don't know if it completely changed ownership, or there was just a proprietorship, or these guys basically rented the distillery. But from 1867 to 1890, it was the Glencadam Distillery Company again. And as you notice, they were back in 1857, 1860. So they were, obviously, it did have somebody else that did, temporarily, and I'd say they rented the distillery or operated the distillery under the Glencadam Distillery Company. And then, of course, it was sold to James Ferguson and Sons, 1890, 1891. And then Gilmer, Thompson and Company. They had it the longest. That was 1891 to 1854. And so it had some stability in those years, other than, of course, like all the other distilleries during the World Wars, and a bit of a slowdown, I think, during Prohibition. But it was Hiram and Walker that purchased it in 1954. Now, Hiram Walker, they completely rebuilt the distillery. I think they added a couple of new stills in that. And, of course, they were taken over by Allied Lynes, which, of course, became Allied or Allied Distilleries. And that takeover was around 1988. And they went up to 1994 when it was actually Allied that actually took over both those companies. And they mothballed it in 2000 because of overproduction. In 2003, again, Glencadam gets some kind of stability because Angus Dundee distillers ended up purchasing it, and they've done good things with it. They started to, this basically was used mostly for blending, and I mean, it was in Stewarts cream and Ballantines. So very few people knew about Glencadam. And Glencadam is located in Brecon. It's an ancient medieval community in the Highlands, in the Eastern Highlands, and it is at one time there was a lot of distilleries there, and today it is the only distillery in that area. And basically, Angus Dundee distillers wanted to get some single malts started. So the first one they started off, and I think it was in 2005, was the 15-year-old. And it was different bottling back then. And then I believe it was 2009 they came out with the 10-year-old and various other bottlings. I think there's a 21-year-old. There's I think a 14. There's some Oloroso finished casks, etc., etc. So that's kind of the scattered history of Glencadam. I mean, it's an old distillery. It's using some of the same old equipment. It's got an ancient Portis grist mill, malt mill, and still using that. The old pot stills. They're an unusual thing about them is they're onion-shaped pot stills, but they're around the 14,000 liter. I believe somewhere around there, and that, of course, that's the wash still. I think the spirit still a few thousand liters less than that. But the lead arm has a 15-degree angle upwards, where most lead arms are usually they're perpendicular, horizontal, or they have a slight slope down. So this is what's unusual about this one is the lead arm is at a slight angle up 15 degrees, which they claim produces their light spirit. And because I've drank a lot of Glencadam, I've never really researched it, and you know, the interesting thing is I mentioned Stewarts cream and the of course Ballantines is what it has been used for, and of course now the big change because it's being used more for malt, so you're going to see more of it. This company, Angus Dundee, wants to get that whiskey out there, and they're at an accelerating rate. They are putting more and more bottlings out there. So, but the master distiller is a fellow by the name of Lorne Macallans. And so that I learned something new. I did not know, I hadn't heard of him. So it's nice to learn a little bit about these distilleries. And of course, the distillery itself does not at present have a visitor center, but they're working on building a visitor center. I think it's one of the focuses of Angus Dundee is to try to get a visitor center. Most visitor centers make money. And in that way, you can hire the locals, and you basically create a lot more marketing for that product. So I think that's something. Evidently, you can do a tour though. You can book ahead for a tour. So let's get into this. I was mentioning with that upward angle of the lead arm off the pot still, it produces a very light spirit, and that was one of the things I've noticed about this is. And it's one of those drinks I go back to. If I've had I mentioned a few whiskeys I like to go to if I'm, like the Aaron was one, if I'd had a bad whiskey or something, it was pissing me off, or maybe it was just having a night where my palate was kind of off and I wasn't doing well with any whiskey, but I could always go to an Aaron, or I could go to a Glencadam, and I could always palate a Glencadam, so that's good for you to know. And for you that like the Glenfiddichs and the Glenlivets, and maybe the Tompatools. By the way, the Tompatool is the same company, Angela Dundee. So, those smooth, the lighter whiskeys and that, you'll like this because it is a very light whiskey. But bottle at a higher ABV than Glenlivet or your Glenfiddich or even your Macallans. So that's always nice to know. 46% ABV. And let's give it the nose. So very, very light on the nose, but I do get, and I can recognize the Glencadam nose. Yeah, this is one I could do blind. So I get very light honey notes, citrus, lime, and lemon, apples. Lots of apples, and some grassy notes there. A little bit of the malt coming through here, but light. And again, the apples seem to be now taking over. The apples, maybe a wee bit of pear there too. And we're going to see Spartan apples. But it does have a light nose and a very recognizable nose. This is one that's going to be very easy. If you were blind nosing this, you'd have no problem. You would remember this nose. So the fruity in the sense like pears and apples, not berries. You're not really getting the berries in that, but like I say, a little bit of the malt notes coming through here. So to the palate. The palate is definitely has a little bit more than the nose, and that it's always a little bit of a surprise because you're expecting this real mellow drink, and it is a fairly smooth ram, but it does have a few stronger notes than what you're getting from the nose. The apples are there. I'm definitely getting even a bit of the stewed fruit now. Honey strong. This is more of a tame honey. It's not a fireweed honey. It's more like a clover honey. But we'll see citrus notes mixed with honey. Not super spicy. Like I say, a little bit of the sweet and sour is what you're going to get with this, sweet and sour. I'm going to top it up again. And there's something else very definite that I get with this. And it is the grassy, maybe a barley taste to it. Maybe it's, if I was chewing on barley grains, barley and oat grains, if I was chewing on them, that's kind of what I taste. So, it's the malt, it's the grain, a lot of grain, cereal notes. That's maybe the best way to describe it, just in general cereal notes. And when you mix that with the apples, the stewed apples and pears, and the honey, it just is something you really can recognize when you drink this. It's something you're going to remember. It's got its own identity. It's a lighter spirit, and it's got a bit of a creamy texture to it, but it's a very light, creamy texture to it. So. And some of the reviews say dry on the tongue. I don't find it dry on the tongue, so not my palate anyways. But I'm ready for the finish. Okay. This isn't a long finish, it's a short finish. But it has an identity. And there's those cereal notes again. And I haven't done a review on this, and I was sort of fighting a little bit for descriptors, and when I was thinking of my palate and I was trying to identify those grains, and I was saying chewing on some barley or maybe even wheat, oats, but it's the grains. You taste the grains. A little bit of sweetness, but there's the citrus notes, the tartness. So, but the finish is fairly short on this, so this one's for me. This is probably one of the easiest sippers that I have in my wheelhouse. The hundreds of different scotches I had, this is just one of the easiest sippers you're going to find. Because the stills are unique and the way they produce this, It's amazing that we are just discovering this since 2005. That's when it was first. Unless there were some special bottlings, maybe the independent bottlers got a hold of the odd bottle, but there's no, of all the research I did, there was no history of independent bottlers bottling this. It was very unknown, this distillery. I mean, unless you're really a drink that's worth, certainly worth having in your cup there on your shelf. I really think it's different. It's a different type of dram than what you're probably used to. It's a very light dram. Some people like light drams. Some people won't like this. It's too light. You know, especially the ones that are the heavy hitters. They're going after the Ardbegs or the Laforgues, or maybe the Glenmorgangies and some of the the stronger, the Glenfarclas, not the Aberlours, the Cherry Bombs and all that. Like this does not have the body those drinks have. It's a very light body. You could see when I showed you the bottle, In fact, what I'll do, I'll pour a little dram there in it. I don't know if I've ever checked the legs of this here, so let's just check the legs and see what the legs are like there. Because it's deceptive because there's a lot of taste. There's a lot of notes, a lot of layers. So, anyways. Score. I'm gonna say that this here, I'm gonna give it an 85. It is a definitely one I'd have in the wheelhouse, and it's a one I go to very often, as you can see by the bottle. So go look for it. Priced, I'm going to say around the $100 range. I paid less than that, of course, for this. I've had this for a couple of years. I'm going to say the next one I buy it, I think it's going to be over 100. But yeah, good whiskey. So I'm going to ask you to drink wisely, drink intelligently. Do not drink and drive. Until the next time, so much.